from here. You can introduce yourself and your gender pronouns and your mode of taking POIs before the round. And please, speakers, try to also respect POI preferences of the speaker that is speaking. Thank you very much. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Please, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I don't see a timer in the chat space. Doesn't mean there will be nothing like that.
I will just help you post timestamps when POIs are open and closed in the chat. The timer bot actually lags, so the timing is incorrect.
Okay. So if there is a problem in the bot, what I would like of you to do is that when I'm in my 4th and 6th minute, please just put it on the chat space for me. I don't have a timer here, please. Hello.
Okay, no problem. No problem.
Okay.
You can begin.
Yeah, I'll take POIs via chat space as well. Please don't badger my speech. A special shout out to my partner for everything. I'm grateful for the sacrifice. Assuming I'm still audible, I start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, panel, in a world where we continuously advocate for the rights of minorities, all countries across the globe necessarily put in structures to make sure that people like people who are largely disabled are people that are factored into the faces of society because we understand things like their rights and what have you. What that means is that at all points in time, whatever government does should go a long way to interest the specific needs of these people as well, right? In today's debate from side governments, we believe that in a world where we want to necessarily give some form of help to these people with disabilities, what we should do is that we should give them some form of direct fundings, right? From this side, from opposition, what they say is that let's put it in direct government services, right? I'll show you why that's what is problematic, right? But first of all, what do these services that these guys advocate for looks like, right? We think that it looks like things like basically specific homes that these particular governments put across, right? Things like specific programs like vocational programs, things like affordable housing policies, and to some extent, they even share food for these people who are disabled to a large extent, right? However, in our world, we say that all these monies that these governments would have otherwise used in the performance of these activities should be channeled towards the individual's accounts directly, right? Why do we what's the problem with the kind of specific services that these guys from opposition would argue, right? I think that the problem with that is the huge bureaucratic processes that comes from securing specific things like, let's say, affordable housing and all of that, right? The kind of limited choice that it comes with. So, for example, someone with disability might not necessarily lack affordable houses. A person might lack something else, right? But in their world, those people don't get that opportunity, right? But then also, that huge reliance that they now get upon the government is something that you don't buy into, right? That is where we introduce our world, right? What does our world look like, right? Our world is a world where necessarily we give these individuals some appreciable amount of monies. It means that opposition cannot run an argument about how these monies are small and cannot cater for these people. We weigh it against the world of vocation and all of those things. We give them some money that is appreciable. We take out that case if they run it, right? What we then do also in our world is that the concession here is that we cannot say that just because government gives them this amount of money, whether at the end of the month or whatever, then government does not care about what happens to them anymore. No, government still cares about these people, right? That is why there'll always be an advocacy for their rights. That is why in places like public institutions, government will still create specific things like stairways, parks, ETCs for these disabilities, right? That is why governments will channel things like specific things into healthcare that will benefit these people. It means that to some extent, government still would have a hand in the lives of these individuals, just that we'll be giving them some specific form of stipends at the end of the month as compared to affordable housing and those things, right? Why should you buy into our world, and who does it impact the most, right? We think our world affects all the stakeholders in today's debate. First of all, the individual, who is our prime interest. Secondly, the government, who is implementing this particular thing, and even the families of these individuals, right? How does it affect the individual? First of all, we think that what our world does is that it creates some form of autonomy for these individuals, right? Because these individuals individuals now get to have some form of choice within them. It means that when you give me that amount of stipend at the end of the month, these individuals are able to determine what they want to use that amount of money for. So let's say this individual necessarily doesn't want a house, but this person wants to invest the money in other ventures. The person gets that opportunity to do it. Instead, the person should come and learn vocation, like let's say sewing or something, and the person doesn't want to learn that, but probably the person wants to use that thing to learn how to be a lawyer or something. That individual gets that opportunity. Autonomy is important, especially for these people who are disabled, because of three reasons. One, it creates some form of empowerment within them, right? In a world where we advocate for minorities, if these minorities are not empowered, then the advocacy is flawed, because at the end of the day, they'll still have things like they're looking down upon themselves and those things, right? Individuals will still clamp down upon them, right? But in the world where they are empowered, we think that they can equally advocate for their rights, right? That still fits into the second one on dignity, right? Because if these individuals are empowered, it creates some form of dignity for themselves. In a world where we advocate for minority rights, we think we should care about the dignity of these people. And lastly, it creates some form of innovation for these individuals when they have autonomy, because now they have that choice to choose what to do with this money. These disabled people don't need to be told what to do. They decide how to go about these things. We think that innovation is one that is relevant for them, right? But secondly, on these individuals, what we do is that we foster some form of integration for these people back into the societies, right? As compared to a world where necessarily there's that likely segregation of these people, right? In our world, you put the monies directly into their accounts, they are still living within the society. That is better off, right? That to a large extent brings me to my third case, which is that it enhances the quality of life of these individuals, because these individuals feel as though they are still normal people. They are still receiving some form of stipends, right? And then they are able to use these things in the ways in which normal people would have lived their life, normal people in quotes for equity reasons, right? But lastly, we think that we take away the whole bureaucracy that would have caused delays in things like securing houses and all of those things, because this is a system that government creates. You get your money and then there's no problem at the end of the day, right? What is the benefit to government who really implements this policy, right? We think that this policy in itself is one that becomes cost effective for government. How? Because now things like getting let's say if it's about housing, teaching people vocation and all of those things, the kind of payments that you would have put into these particular sectors is one that governments can clamp down upon, as compared to giving the monies directly to these individuals, because we calculate per interest how much we think that these individuals will need to live their normal lives, and then we give to these individuals, right? That to a large extent reduces the burden on the state, right? We think that in a world where states are crying, hello,
Yeah,
we think that in a
PICU.
I'll take you later. We think that in a world where states are crying economically, we should consider reducing the burden on this particular state, right? But then lastly, still on governments, what you do is that you prevent some form of abuse and neglect of these individuals, right? Because understand that when there's this huge structure within government that says cater for minorities, cater for individuals, there are always individuals that are selfish within society that always clamp down on these people. That's why you see things like institutions like the orphanages, etc., that you have the authorities in there running away with specific food items and all those things. In our world, we take away all of those problems, because now government really impacts the life of the individuals directly and not through a third party, right? We think that to a large extent aligns with the human rights that governments are seeking for these particular individuals. That is the world that we buy into, right? The last thing you get from us is the impact for these families, right? We think that what you do in our world is that you encourage some form of family unity and cohesion, right? Because at the end of the day, these families still feel like they belong to these individuals, right? Because in our world, what you do is that when you create that innovation and that empowerment for these people, they are largely not dependent on these particular governments anymore, right? It means that to a large extent, families have that incentive to be a part of the lives of these individuals. We think that in the world where we prioritize family life, we should buy into our world. For all these reasons, we proudly propose here.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for that speech. We now invite the leader of opposition. Please, Joseph, can you mute your mic? Joseph, something. Thank you very much. Leader of
Hello,
opposition, you have.
here. Okay, my name is Kelvin, pronouns he, they. POS through chat. I will check chat. I think my phone's not lagging like last round, so I think I'm able to see the chat now. Um, wait, let me try chatting. Okay, okay, that works. So, I will take POIs, so you don't have to worry. Starting my speech in three, two, one. Take it from someone who has a physical disability. Take it from someone who actually knows the system. Take it from me. Notice that we do not get them by giving direct monetary compensation to a lot of these disabled people are so good when in fact they are literally disabled. Who's going to buy their wheelchairs? Them? They can't even properly maneuver themselves without equipment. I can't properly maneuver myself without the equipment I need. So you say the money is going to be useless even at the get-go coming from opening government. But let's talk about this because even at the best benevolence where you have caretakers, sure, we need to realize then what this direct stipend will look like. We need to agree. Direct stipend can end up letting you pay for the same equipment if we buy it and concede, which is going to be our best benevolence towards open government. And sure, it allows disabled people to operate under freedom at the very end of the day. But we need to understand that this is how this house believes at motion. We do not have to say that the reason why we think states shouldn't give stipend is because government systems don't have money. Nor can we say that Gov say that we shouldn't give state-owned disability services because they lack the equipment of distribution. This case is on a debate where we think they should provide something over the other. So we assume all charitability in both cases. What is the alternative in OO? Probably the states owns disability services like i.e. privileges in government sectors, provided equipment and caretakers or anything that is given by the government to alleviate the lives of these individuals. We say then that the state-owned disability service also include i.e. infrastructure or discounts in other areas since it's part of state-owned disability service. In OG, they cannot have discounts and the state-owned disability service and the PWD card would have to remove all these privileges and will replace it with stipend. Those stairs that are state-owned disability service anyway probably can stay there because they're already built anyway, but future innovations will not have this at all. This makes this debate more controllable because if government co-opts all of these benefits of having state-owned disability services anyway, we shouldn't be debating. But on the best benevolence, sure, yes, some sectors have this, but a lot of other sectors will not have this anyway. But we have to note, what are the major implications of the stipend? Probably you'll give this money to PWD individuals and those who do need care at the very end of the day. Why is this extremely difficult to manage and handle coming from PWD people? Three reasons. Number one, we argue this provides state complacency, and this is one of the most important arguments. Why is this true? You remove the hard work of understanding people's disabilities because you do not even need to see them to be able to actually give them disabilities, to be able to actually give them proper stipend, or providing insight as to how to properly compensate them in their mechanisms of living. And just assume that with money, they are able to live with the same normal lives as a lot of majority in status quo. What happens then is when we redistribute state accountability through funds to the people, you make their freedom become the mechanism of pushing that agency and accountability on these disabled people in the very end of the day. This happened in my own home city. When they discontinued discounts and other privileges I was able to gain and push for like stipends or whatnot. And what happened was a lot of businesses and public sectors progressively got less disabled friendly. And so I had to buy more procedures like crutches to be able to maneuver through the new non-disabled friendly city I was in. This is because now that they're giving out money, they find it unnecessary to change structures to develop for disabled people. But even if some people do end up developing for disabled people, sure, this does not remove the state and corporate complacency. Because of the funds being flushed to them, now you can concentrate on making your city livable for these disabled people because frankly, these governments think that the problem has been solved at the very end of the day. What does this mean? When disabled people like us started clamoring for much more these services, the only thing our local government told us was to just use the money we get to buy equipment or buy a caretaker or accompany us. Notice how problematic this is to a lot of disabled people, which goes on to my second analysis. Usually, people are also then more marginalized than the general consensus, and they're already structurally barred from places in the workforce. A lot of parents abandon their disabled kids because they are extremely hard to maintenance, and just like me, we're able to live alone. We say then the ability to progress to properly progress in benefit of disabled people is much worse under opposition government side. Because realize the reason why funding these disabled people never works is because they assume they are able to access the market to help them access the resources they need. Notice they cannot. A person who needs a wheelchair can never buy a wheelchair if they don't have money, if they don't have the ability to be able to walk to get that wheelchair. And it's when we emphasize this material social services to be super important in OO. Because at least I could maneuver around the place, and even if we don't get a lot of money, let's talk about why this is exponentially better. I say then that the money you get will never alleviate the growing structural complacency against you. In my hometown, the reason I couldn't get a freelance job in the government to pay for myself was because their infrastructure was so hard to use for disabled people, like me, that I was not legible to work in their spaces, and they just told me to buy shit, right? It is the fact that a lot of these areas have become so complacent that it has made it exponentially harder for me to be able to progress, to be able to get a job and maneuver myself inside my own city. This even works outside the possibility of complacency. But sure, even if I had found a benevolent company anyway, this doesn't remove the fact that I still needed crutches or cash to go to that very benevolent company, or that I didn't have crutches or cash to buy those crutches or casts, and had to convenience other people to be with me. The solvency is simple on OO. Not only do you incentivize on better disabled-friendly structures, but even if disabled-friendly structures didn't exist, equipment is guaranteed for a lot of disabled people to at least help themselves maneuver throughout their own spaces. Because like I said, I would have rather had a proper job in education than keep getting kicked out of spaces because I couldn't operate on those areas. But we also say that on and OO, we are able to then properly find ways to actually improve the gradual life of a disabled person. We say that not just on complacency, but the opportunity cost is what makes the world of OG so big for disabled people. Where governments go, I'm already giving money, I don't want to spend more to do this to you, that you never improve the gradual life of a disabled person. Because to them, I'm already benefiting these disabled people. I would have to be able to get discounts anywhere. I would be able to get special caretakers and premiums in provincial hospitals, nor will I have been able to gain constant programs to uplift the inclusion of disabled people in other areas, because in all, they are now forced as government systems to provide the most relevant social services, because they are forced to see these disabled people so that they know what exactly it is to on how to deal with these disabled people. But secondly, then, we posit that if you really wanted money and not compensations for your disability, you would have pushed for stimulus checks in social services elsewhere, because disabled people are not the only minorities who need stimulus checks. A lot of other minorities, like poor and impoverished people, could have had stimulus checks either way. And we say that in our side, we could have had stimulus checks on other areas of proper social service for the marginalized, but at least it benefits other people other than you. What is the meta here? Because we say not all disabled people need money, because some disabled people can be rich, but all disabled people need ways in which to help them, need the social services for them to be able to properly maneuver at the very end of the day. But sure, I'll take a POA before I move on. 3, 2, 1.
Disabilities represented in very vague and broad disability services on your side.
I was given a wheelchair for the literal government system I was in, because of the fact that they found out that I literally had broken bones on my legs. I was given casts to be able to cover my left arm disability. They were able to see me so that they were able to actually properly compensate me, rather than in your side where they don't have the incentive to see you. They can just give you the money and just extrapolate how much you're able to actually use that money at the very end of the day. Notice that the proximity of being able to push for that empathy towards disabled people happens better in our side. But we say then, not all disabled people need money, because some disabled people can be rich, but all disabled people need ways to help them. What if you give disabled special stipends to a rich person the same way you give stimulus checks to a poor person? It becomes redundant, and not only that, but it becomes blind to the plights of all these disabled people. Notice that it not only becomes harmful for these stimulus checks, because frankly, some disabled people might not need these stipends anyway, and some people who are probably poor might need these stipends more than disabled people who probably are rich at the very end of the day and are able to actually maneuver themselves. So panel, if you wanted dignity and empowerment, we can probably empower people better, or disabled people better, if you're able to push them to be allowed to live, not if you're able to push them to pay for their life.
Thank you very much, Leader of Opposition, for that speech. We now invite the Deputy Prime Minister to advance the case of opening government.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, kindly give me a few seconds to set my timer, then get it up and running. Yeah, and also, guys, I won't be using the text space. I'm in town at the moment and I'm using my phone to prep. And so I won't be using the text space. I won't be able to see anything that you put in there. So please and please again, if you have any POIs right from my 4th minute, please just say POI. And then if I'm ready, I would pick you. If I am not to, I would inform you of when I would necessarily take you. All right, just a second. Okay. Assuming that I am still audible, unfortunately, there's a bit of noise in my area. So at any point, if you can't hear me because I'm in town, please just let me know, and then I'll try to do a repositioning and then continue as well. All right. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Here's why opening government would not get to go to finals. Opening government, first of all, says that when it comes to the issue of money, people who are disabled or people with disabilities, when you give them the money, ultimately the money is useless. I am unsure, because that sounds like a very novice argument. Because my question is, if you have substantial amount of money, why exactly can't you subscribe to a particular service of your own choice that allows individuals to move you in a wheelchair, or probably get a wheelchair for you? The debate is not about whether or not when we give you that money, you won't be able to use that money for anything. And that's why Mary fiats in her case that that money is a calculated substantial amount of money. The entire case you get from Gov assumes that that is first of all a tokenistic amount of money. I'm going to prove why that in itself throws them out of the debate. First of all, the debate says that government should provide people with 2 options, either with direct stipends or state-owned disability homes. It means that first of all, the debate fiats government will to be able to do these things. It means that on either side of the debate, government is committed to ensuring that at the end of the day, people with disabilities have an advantage in society and are not entirely disadvantaged in societies and maintained as minorities. It means that God cannot run a debate that assumes that on our side, the government will not care about these people, probably just do a tokenistic amount of sharing of money. But also, secondly, they make a case and say that, well, the identification of these people would literally be impossible because in their world, you can see these people and put them in some homes. In our world, that won't happen. It's still the same case on government will. But the second thing we say is that how you need to understand about especially cases where we discuss people with disabilities. These issues have some form of emotional backdrop. And when it falls on the government to make a decision, people are constantly expecting the government to take action. It means that in that situation, the government is put under intense scrutiny to be able to solve the problems of these guys. We don't see why government will have no incentive and simply be throwing out cash for people that they can't see or just not care about them. At best, panel, be fair to everybody. We can't assume government will on both sides. OG is out of the debate. All their cases are hinged on this. They make no better argumentation. There's two things I'm going to prove. First of all, and that's all of those things come from Mary's speech. Is it if it's OG, you can shoot. If it's CG, you can wait. OG. 3, 2, 1. All right. The debate concerns two things. First of all, what these people would ultimately want or what benefits them the most. And two, how we make the space of disability services progressive and better. But you see, the characterization of people with disabilities, especially for this debate to be relevant, is simple. That these guys don't have money. Why is it true? And it's just a simplified version of what I'm just saying. I'm giving the structural reasons why that is so. First of all, aside all the social disadvantages that these guys face, like stigma, discrimination, it is ultimately clear that these guys often need some sort of unique and constant care that is beyond ordinary. So, for example, blind people need some sort of guidance, same as people with hearing impairment, etc. All of this is handled by cost, money, and that's why the government could either give you a home where they pay people to in fact take care of it, which is money, or they give you that money directly. But secondly, think of the debates this way. If these guys had money, would probably not be arguing out about whether or not we should give them stipend. It means I will probably be arguing about whether the services are better or not. The case literally then transcends that these guys need money in some way. Should we give it to them or the government should use the money on their behalf? How does Mary prove that giving them this money directly is better for them? And the concession here is simple. Panel, please take note. So closing doesn't give a different frame. The concession here is that that money is calculated to an extent that it can appreciably take care of the needs of these people. And the fiat is simple on government will to be able to take care of these things. Yeah, shoot your POI quickly.
I live in a province. I was given the money, but I couldn't walk towards the city. How am I able to pay for the things that I need to be able to use to maneuver myself as a disabled person?
And don't worry, I'll probably analyze that in my case in some other way. So here's another thing you need to note, which Mary gives you. She says that it promotes individual choice and autonomy. What do we give them the money, or when we give them the money, what we do is that we empower these people to make choices about themselves, about their healthcare, their living arrangements, and their family. In essence, what you do is that you give them the ability to allocate funds according to their specific needs and preferences. Mary ends there, but I'm going to show you why this is important. One, in principle, we seal the existential loophole that exists in the lives of people with disability. And let me give you a more nuanced analysis. Panel, listen carefully. A lot of people with disability are incapacitated. And especially for those who need constant care, probably people who were born disabled from birth, they even need extra and are entirely incapacitated. In principle, giving them money is like giving them something they never had. Like, for example, someone who can never speak, you give them the ability to speak. Giving them money is like that because they're incapacitated. They can never make money to have control over their lives. Giving them money is simply replacing exactly what they have lost in principle. So ultimately, Mary tells you, you increase their autonomy, their dignity, and all the other things. But secondly, we can agree that to some extent, government services might be good, but choice is still far more important. Why? Because every time the conversation about people with disabilities come up, you hear emotional breakdown stories of how they think they have no value in themselves. When we give them that money, that intrinsic empowerment is one that they get. You put them in a state home, you still control their lives, and they have no way of choosing what they want. That first power to choose what they want is what brings back that value and autonomy. Here's another extension you get from me. we create a progressive industry around disabilities. And panel, note this. In status quo, in the vast majority of instances, services for disabilities are government-based, right? What this means is that there are very few private industries that invest in that sector. And that's why these guys, OG assumes that, well, if you give them the money, then there is no other disability service. It is no longer going to be the government, but there will definitely be some of them springing up. And that's what I'm going to go and show you in this debate from here. OP should not simply, or GAV should not simply come, OP should not simply come here and come and say that, well, we are going to make a business out of these things. For fact's sake, when the government is doing it, they pay people to do these jobs. It's still business. We don't think that's what the case is about. But the point here is that in a world where you give them money, what you do is that private individuals and NGOs begin to actively invest in people with disabilities to be able to allow them to maximize their returns. The reason why this is not going to be economically capitalistic, like probably OP will try to prove, is that the case of disabilities is a social issue which has an emotional backdrop and can lead to a huge backlash. It means that whilst they are actively investing in these fields, they are also trying as much as possible to give these people what they want. What you do in a world is that you create an industry where you can foster a culture of creativity, efficiency, and responsiveness in the world of these guys. On any day, there's no way OP places over any team in GAF. Proudly GAF.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister, for that speech. We now invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to close the opening half for us.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, my name is Matthew. POI through voice. Feeling sleepy. Okay, POI through voice. Wait. Okay. Am I still audible? Someone called me in Messenger. I'm really sorry. Hello?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Again, my name is Matthew. Pronouns he, him. POI through voice. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. If there's a very thing that I need to agree in DPM, that is OG is really out of this debate. Thank you for that, because you guys are failing from the get-go. Let's talk about the OG's now of his argument, where they assume that funding and money will solve the problem for these disabled people. Notice, they couldn't engage about all the structural harms these disabled people go through that enable them to operate and maneuver the society. But let's engage. Even if you're given an incentive to change and help these people, and you decide to give them money instead, you fail in upholding the scrutiny in the first place. But we posit that then they are false, because the trade-off is remove all of these other services in the first place. That's what's going to happen in OG and TG. That needs the services then now, not just money, because you need to understand that the more proximate thing that these people need is a cure or treatment, not the ability to pay for a cure or treatment, because that's not even applicable for all. And if you need constant care, then you could have given them the ability to cure themselves by giving them the ability to have this hospital privilege in the first place. But they say choice. Notice this choice is what made LO not get jobs in the first place, because of this choice on the first place, so on and so forth, because of the expense that people need to go through to all of the structural reforms that we have right now in government that allows people, or that is built upon anti-PWD reforms. You need to prove how the state will have an adamant resources to put this kind of money allocation in for PWD in the first place for it to be enough. Because we say, in order to fluctuate a systemic reforms in long term, it is only available when you hold a state system which is only available in our side when we proliferate this kind of systemic reform which has the social services. But sure, let's be charitable and assume that they have the budget to do this in the first place. You still need to prove how you would avoid corrupted financial help from those LGUs that can just simply suck away all of these resources in the first place, when the state is too complacent and doesn't require solid tangible benefits or solid tangible evidence for them to say that they are helping this PWD in the first place. Because I want to point out, people in far-flung areas can never know that they have this kind of stipend right in the first place, but LGUs can still exist and they can still suck it out and hide this kind of right in the first place and suck this kind of money in the first place. No point of safeguard in legal structure in OG alone. So the problem with the government is that they assume that the mechanism of getting good life for disabled people is to let them suffice themselves with the money that they would get in the first place. Not only this is a lazy approach, but we posit it can never be enough to help these people. Also, as a person with a lot of PWD friends, this is not only problematic, this is also pissing me off right now. One, they never explained how these people suddenly have the capacity to independently run the circles of their lives within this kind of money in the first place, knowing that they're also hindered from having this kind of capacity in the first place is why they're disabled. In OO, you see states having a rigorous check to know which individuals deserve to be given by a wheelchair in far-flung areas, deserve to be given by to be given mobility equipment for household modification. In Gov's world, you lose this ability to call out state when their services doesn't cater you because people will be complacent that these PWDs are being taken care of by state's money in the first place, in which we posit that will never be enough. Because imagine being PW in these rural areas who doesn't have systemic facilities of social care services that you diminish in Gov's world that ought to protect you in the first place. Not only do you see how useless this money is, when you do not have the means to buy any necessary equipments, when OJ and CJ pushes a great amount of complacency in status quo. Two, in their world, the state would not have the capacity to sense the urgency to scatter social services structures here in this modern states when OG and CG possess that money is enough. In OO, we still have the monetary benefit either way in forms of PWD discounts, discount cards. Because we say that if affording something is a problem for PWD, we say that all of this discount that you get from
POI.
all of the benefits that you get coming from this is already enough to be active in the first place right now in status quo. I want to pluck out any contentions from Gov that, in their world, they can still have PWD discounts at the very end of the day. No, that's not how jurisprudence works. That's double monetary amount. That's anti-state, and people will just call out the structure of the state in the first place. That's not how law works. Two, the amounts of abuses this PWC will go through in their world and will make the state complacent in their world of their abuses will be so much worse. Simple. When you are a PWD from an abusive working class family, they can just simply use this kind of money or mechanism of stipend to just abuse you and use the heck out of you as a means of income. These are the amount of instances that discourage Philippines from having this kind of reforms in the first place because this is going to be harmful. The thing is, it is harder to enter the internal life of these PWDs when you
POI.
bar them to opt into the. Okay, I'll go take your POI. Make it fast.
So I think that you are making an overextension of the debate because we can see when you say things like using them as a means to an end, we can say there exist social structures that protect them, like laws, courts, all those things. You are bringing
Okay, sure. I get that.
in late
Sure,
matter that
you
an
have laws.
extension of the debate.
Okay, sure, you have laws. You can still call them out. They're still held liable. But the thing is, the state is too complacent when there are no social structures, facilities near you. When you diminish it in God's world, it is harder for you to call them out when state is being complacent of your agency at the very end of the day. It is harder to enter the internal life of these PWDs when you bar them to opt into the house services, absent the disability services by state in your world. And I want to note this type of harm will just entice people to make PWDs as a money looting services, and at the very end of the day, no benefit will be placed at them at all. There's no point of safeguard coming from the government alone. Also, it is important to call out that the state's budget for PWD is not that huge in the first place. Not that huge in the first place. I think I called it out in my first minute. Also, on another constructive response for job opportunities and neglect of PWDs, I want to point out that as society transgress, we live in 21st century. The left-wing agendas are already there to call out structures that are anti-PWD and displace them out of job. Notice how in the world of proposition, it is easier to jeopardize PWD individuals in job selection because they can simply say that stipends are already there. We are not incentivized to care for you. We already weaken the movement right now because you already have the monetary capacity to do this. But if you would have a complacent state, you would also have a weaker movement to call out anti-PWD job selection, anti-PWD companies in the first place, because the scrutiny for job being anti-PWD is placed outside of the emphasis when we do not put when we put a psyche that these individuals are already quote unquote financially held by state. For all those reasons, proud to oppose.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for ending the opening half for us. We now invite the member of government to advance the closing half.
Speak like this fine. Can everyone hear me? Can someone hear me?
Yes. Yes, you're audible.
Okay, awesome. Grab my timer. Right. I'll be beginning in 3, 2, 1. Panel, there are only two teams that can win in today's debate, either closing government or closing opposition, because this debate is not about how we can provide that better access or provide the access that the open halving is talking about. It's who can better cater to the individual identity of those who is disabled. This motion is about identity. It is not about the things that opening half tells you. Before I move on to rebuttal and substantive, I'm going to give some characterization. Firstly, we need a better characterization of what government services looks like, right? It looks like hospitals that cater for the deaf, right, through cochlear implants. We think it also looks like teaching individuals who are deaf to be active within like the economy in general, right? Second, on the government services, we get an idea from the opening half that they look like they're less transparent and they're worse at being able to distribute resources. Second, right, what the government looks at when they're looking at these disabled individuals as individuals who are not fulfilling that individuals, they look at them in two ways. Firstly, they're individuals who are not contributing to the economy because they are disabled. And secondly, that they're not a target, like they're not a majority voting base. There are very comparatively few disabled individuals within our society, and they are not a majority voting base. What does this mean? Two things. Firstly, it means that the government doesn't want to cater to those individuals, but I'll get to that in my second half. But secondly, and more importantly, that it means that the attitude of governments is to uplift and to remove the disability as much as they can from those individuals. That gets important for my first and the most important argument in today's debate. Right. What is our stance then in today's debate? Firstly, we're going to support this government stipend when firstly, it creates a sector that better caters for those disabled. But secondly, and most importantly, it allows them to take pride in their identity and not have their identity sidelined. What do we get from side opposition in today's debate? We get the idea that public sectors are not likely to be disability friendly when this like funding is no longer available to them. They concede that this isn't the case because the infrastructure that exists isn't going to be demolished. But we think there are two responses here. Firstly, it's unrealistic that the government is going to pursue those actions. It's very, very fortunate that the leader of opposition lived in a hometown where his disabilities were catered for. But we think in the majority of Africa that doesn't it isn't the case because governments don't want to cater for those individuals. They believe that they usually have like more pressing issues to deal with. But secondly, we think that private companies are better able to do this in status quo. I'll get onto that in my argument. Secondly, we get an idea about proximity and that through proximity and through governments being able to deal with these individuals, there's likely to be more empathy. Panel, we don't think this is the case, right? We think that government believes that these individuals don't contribute to society and that they're lazy. We think when these individuals have to now take on or actively try and uplift these individuals, it makes them feel like those individuals are burdens to society. It doesn't create empathy, it creates resentment, right? The last thing that we get is this idea of unequal distribution, and we're not likely to give like equal stipends to individuals who are poor. We think that only happens in our absolute worst case, but it is still beneficial for our side when I get onto it in my second argument about private companies. Three arguments then. Firstly, about why the agenda of the government undermines the agenda of those who are disabled. Second, on why private services are better. And thirdly, on the importance of niche disabilities being catered for on our side. First, some context under the first argument about why the agenda of government undermines those individuals. We think the government has complete control. No thanks. We think the government has complete control to fulfill any kind of, or to create any kind of industry that they see fit, right? Firstly, we think that specific industries or specific institutions are not going to be preferred by these individuals. They don't have a say within the government, so the government is just going to take the actions that they think best. These individuals don't get a say. Second, we've already told you that the aim of the government is to improve the economy as a whole and to improve their own political power, which means they're not going to cater for individuals, having the opportunity to do things that they enjoy. Instead, they're going to create clinics to create cochlear implants so that they can get these disabled people as quickly we get these disabled people to be able-bodied as quickly as possible. Thirdly, we think the governments are going to pursue those kinds of things. Three impacts of this argument then. On their side, those who are disabled cannot get the treatment that they believe they should be entitled to. They don't have a say in what that treatment looks like, and they simply don't get a choice. Secondly, the most prolific form of service actively denies people their identity, right? This means that like the government is likely to engage in policies that actively uplift like the majority of what disabled people look like. Maybe that's individuals who cannot walk, and they're going to neglect individuals who don't, like people with autism or individuals who have very niche, nuanced disorders, but I'll get more onto that later. But thirdly, it doesn't engage with the nuance and the agenda of disabled people. We think that disabled people deserve a choice in how exactly they're going to go about dealing with their disability. The government is a one-size-fits-all that undermines that identity. If you side with side opposition, encourage undermining that identity. Before I move on to the second argument about competition, I'll take a POI.
You really don't need to invalidate my experiences to make a case, but at least then the complete control allows for guarantee for disabled people to get treatment because governments are incentivized to make industries and services. In your side, you rely on private services that might not even make things for these disabled people because you never give incentives for them to do so.
Super cool. You're insinuating that the government incentive to do these things is less than the private sector incentive to do profit. Unfortunately, we live in capitalism. I live in a capitalist society, but that means that companies are going to try better to achieve these services. That's what my entire argument is. Firstly, we think that the government infrastructure is still going to exist under status quo and that is going to be put forward by private services. Why is this the case? Because when you provide economic power to disabled individuals, you create two things. Firstly, you create a demand for those nuanced services. If somebody who has a nuanced disability actively wants to see a specific treatment on the market, it is likely to exist because they have money to spend, and those things are going to exist. It's not a social grant, it's a stipend, right? Secondly, we think that these individuals now have more of an ability to opt out of harmful business practices. If a specific business or a specific sector isn't actively being like blind friendly or deaf friendly, you can opt out of those things. The impact here, panel, is that you get more nuanced resources if you actively side with private corporations. Secondly, that more infrastructure is developed as corporations develop, right? Panel, we think that they can only win if they can prove the government's incentive is that more powerful than private corporations' incentive to make profit. It isn't, you side with side proposition.
Very much, member of government, for that speech. When I invite the member of opposition.
Okay, I'd like to confirm I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Right. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think CG goes, very low and decides to invalidate the experiences of OO for them to win. But even then, they still don't win. CO is the only side that wins because we satisfy the burden of this debate, which is to prove why what world best caters for the unique needs of these disabled people. I think a couple of things are missing in characterization, which made the entire debate very messy, especially in the opening half. OO, and these are our principal distinction from them, right? OO failed to properly characterize what exactly state-owned disability services look like. Believe it's a range of support panel, and this is why we beat them out. It looks like healthcare, it looks like rehabilitation, it looks like education, it looks like vocational training and social services. All of these are the range of activities that are promised and can be offered by the state that form part of the conventional then tackling of these disability services that are present. The impact of this, right, is that these disabled individuals themselves are able to gain psychological support, and even more importantly, panel, these disabled people need to be able to cope in a world that is built around able people. They need to be able to alleviate themselves from these problems. They need to be able to take themselves to the next level, right? Notice then that the comparative that exists on government world is twofold. One, these individuals now have money, meaning the panel that a large portion of that money is actually going to be used to pay for these amenities that opposition world is actually rooting for. Noting panel that these disability amenities are likely to be incredibly expensive in nature, meaning panel that no amount of money can actually be used to service all of these needs. Even if OG argues for a progressive model in the determination of what needs are present or that kind of thing, we argue that because of two reasons, which one, sheer number of needs, and even secondly, because of the nature of the individual type of need, need. There's no money that will ever be enough to be able to service the needs and requirements of these individuals. Even secondly, panel, right? Upward through that, not directly paying people, right? We cater for these issues that you're most likely to pay for anyway, leaving the little income or leaving any income you have, including the little income that you may have, to be able to maximize your own personal needs and personal ambitions, simply because the state is taking up its ability to actually be able to protect your needs as a disabled person, recognizing you as a citizen of that state. Even thirdly, right, what exactly do disabled people look like? And this is why we beat CG when they talk about the identity of this disabled person. Three things. One, they need specialized care over a long period of time. I mean, this kind of supportive care that comes exclusively from CO is therefore prioritized because of that guaranteed opportunity to access the important, the important quality of life that is compared, right? The improved quality of life rather, compared to giving this money, which is not in line with the state's incentives. Even secondly, right? There's a wide range of people who have challenges, from a disability standpoint. What we can note that is a bare minimum, all of them have mental challenges. But there's a possibility of these individuals also have physical challenges as well, which would mean two things, panel. One, there is a lot of mental anguish that is present for these people. And secondly, the high possibility of physical trauma. What is the impact of this, panel? These people are living and functioning in a world that is difficult. Meaning, panel, they need maximum support possible for them to be able to live and to be able to exist. That exclusively then comes from CO. Thirdly, panel, and again, most importantly, they have ever expanding needs, which are compounding in nature. Best intuition pump for this is Down syndrome and autism, panel. These individuals first need to learn how to express themselves. After learning that, they need to learn how to behave. After learning that, then that's when they can be able to actualize that Maslow's hierarchy of their needs and the kind of incentives that they're present in society. Panel, they cannot be able to do all of these things when government seeks to only give them some sort of stipend because they believe that that's how they solve the problem. CO uniquely creates solvency. That's why we win this debate today. Moving, panel, swiftly, right, into the core questions, that into some analysis, actor analysis that's present, largely again missing in opening half. This debate is uniquely about disabled people, but there are other people existed within the confines of the debate. CG's problem is they're dealing with a malevolent government, right? Because a government which is extremist in nature, and panel, you shouldn't credit them for that. The government's core obligation is to protect citizens no matter their state, right? And they have that obligation to protect, meaning then that this burden to economy narrative is something that is actually existent within their world, simply because then the government is only looking at these people as money-sucking machines and not any benefit to the economy. Even secondly, panel, we tell you there is existing a support system around this disabled person. But that support system, panel, is likely to be seriously, hampered and having some serious level of problem, simply because they are likely the one who's going to be catering for this individual, most likely when this individual is struggling with mental challenges, panel, and they are most likely then, especially in developing states coming from impoverished backgrounds, COs will protect them nonetheless. And even more importantly, panel, disabled people themselves, right, who are the most vulnerable actor, who need two things. One, some level of love and care, and even secondly, and that's the only guarantee you get from CO's world, that return to that level of semblance of normalcy that exists. They don't want to feel like they're struggling. They don't want to feel like they're unique. They want to feel like they're every other citizen that existent within society. Three core questions that we solve from CO that are existent in the entirety of this debate. What exactly is the issue of what exactly are the needs of these individuals and how best to solve them? Secondly, who is this money exactly going to? Because notice, panel, for a mentally challenged individual, they don't have access to a bank account, meaning it's probably their dependents who are getting this money who take care of them. And even secondly, panel, the generalization of that disability, right, means we can't understand these core questions of an allocation concerns, whether this money is going to their primary needs or whether it's going to their specialized needs. OG failed us in that burden. But even then, right, co-extension then from CO, our world best enhances the quality of life for the stakeholders involved, including the most vulnerable actor, who is the disabled person. Notice, panel, that these disabled people already come from a wide array of backgrounds. However, Upward will allow maximization of equality because access to services is standardized. Notice that the similarity between a rich disabled person and a poor disabled person is that they're disabled, and they both need that service for them to be able to access some level of normalcy that I've told you they need. Analysis for this is threefold. One, we have better advocacy and enhancement of independence, inclusion, and accessibility coming from CO's world, simply because empowerment of these individual lines through support services by addressing the specific challenges they have allows them to actually fully participate in society. Net impact of this is we enhance human dignity and respect for these disabled persons, meaning the society generally and the support system acknowledges the inherent worth and dignity of these people regardless of their ability levels. Even secondly, we win on the clash of choice, right, and how these individuals spend this money. OG and government at large fail to understand that this spending is most likely to be spent on their proximate needs and less on long-termistic concerns as a human being. Meaning, panel, the net impact and why CO win is there's never really real advancement for these disabled people, and there's never ability for them to be able to change their socio-economic mobility and be able to change the outlook of their lives and having that paradigm shift that is much needed for these individuals. Even more importantly, panel, we win on the long-term, short-term comparative because these individuals don't need money, they need what it pays for, right? Therefore, we risk on the long term need these individuals need to have access to skills and assistance. My whip is going to come in and do a robust, harms and benefits analysis while showing you why CO takes the day, while doing a bit of impacting and weighing of our material against the other sides material in this debate. Never been prouder to win from closing up.
Thank you very much, member of opposition, for that speech. We now invite the government whip to end the debate for government.
Cool. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Great. I'll start shortly. Hi, my name is Juhi. My pronouns are she, her. You can ask me POIs audibly, but I will signal you when I'm ready to take one, so no need to badger. Cool. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I don't think that I can move anywhere further in this debate before addressing the experiences of the leader of opposition. We truly do feel sorry and we empathize with the experiences of the leader of opposition. The only difference in this case, what the Filipino government was able to do was it was able to give the leader of opposition crutches and a wheelchair. That is something that they genuinely needed in order to achieve that purpose of being able to move again, of being able to move around. The only difference in this debate panel is that you cannot assume every single disabled person wants this reality. It is an idea that you must be functional, that you must be productive in society. Again, we think this is a blanket and overarching statement used to oppress the disabled, that not every single blind person wants to see again. Not every single deaf person wants to get cochlear implants that are subsidized by the government. We think that this was an overarching narrative, a blanket one, an oppressive one to the disabled people that they want to talk about. Firstly, I'll just talk about where the debate actually takes place, because it seems that it got messed up on opening. One, we told you that infrastructure for disabled already exists. Whether that infrastructure is at the maximal standard isn't in the debate, but we also told you that there's a difference between the disabled infrastructure and disabled services. So let me give you the difference panel. Disabled services looks like trying to provide cochlear implants for the deaf. It looks like trying to teach like people of the blind, trying to cook and clean again. It looks like trying to promote and trying to help the most common disabilities in your society. I'm going to show you why that's structurally flawed and why disabled infrastructure can still exist to a far greater extent and coexist on our side. Secondly, tell you that there's like a very big assumption that the governments that we're talking about are very complacent and that they are not governments that are doing the right things. Panel, I want you to talk, I want to just alert you to what the debate's actually about. There's a very broad healthcare budget that goes on under the status quo. That healthcare budget is divided into a million different sectors. One of those sectors has to be disability services. The only difference then is that the disability services that the government is providing is one of disabilities having to compete with each other. Do we need more ramps in society, or do we need more special schools for the blind? We don't think that there's a legitimate choice for the people of the disabled to make. Secondly, let's just talk about medical research here for a second, panel, because medical research is technically the decision that informs the types of disabled services that we're going to get into society. We're think that there's been a huge bias toward the types of medical research that exists under the status quo. It looks like how women have literally not been included in medical research until the early 2000s. It looks like how so many people don't know about cellular fibrosis that Black people face currently. This informs the types of services that we give to people. Like assuming that this isn't a disability, but assuming that we are dealing with disabilities, we're only going to be promoting the very broad disabilities that looks like the blindness, the deaf. We don't focus on the smaller ones, such as cerebral palsy, tubular fibrosis. We think this is very harmful because the types of the types of broad services that they want on their side of the house are ones that stroke and paint every single disabled person in the same brush. Experiences of the disabled. One, let's just talk about where the money is used more effectively. the status quo, there's a very limited healthcare budget, right? This is playing off the exact same characterization that opening gives us, the characterization that the government is complacent. This is for two reasons. One, because they have to be very broad, right? Which means that there's much like minimal political representation for the disabled. I think a really good example of this is what the disabled movement literally fought for. They fought for the government not to assume things about their identity, not to assume what they want, not to put blatantly high prices on their medication. But secondly, we think it's also the basis of very biased medical research. I already explained to you why niche representation for really niche disabilities isn't represented under the status quo. But secondly, what do stipends do and how do they fix this directly? One, they give the disabled a direct form of financial autonomy. To say that I can choose whether to use my money to buy Depiram, which is a medication used for epilepsy that has known to have very high prices in the past, or I can choose to use it to fix something else in my household. This is very important because the government doesn't know what's going on behind the closed doors of your household. But secondly, you get to make a choice panel. This is very different from the choice that opening wants to claim. The choice that we get here is a choice about what the government acknowledges, that you are a disabled person, you still have a choice, you still can make decisions that affect your life. The narrative surrounding disabled people is that they want to be normal, is that they want to be to contribute to society in the same way that everybody else does. That isn't what the disabled community wants. They want to be appreciated for who they are and the choices that they make. What does opening say? One, they say that accessing disabled infrastructure becomes significantly harder. One, I'll explain to you the difference between disabled infrastructure versus disabled services. Secondly, we think this is very important because they try to alleviate every single sort of ramp that exists under our side of the house. They also don't engage where the debate takes place. But finally, on our side, it means that it can coexist and you remove the mutual exclusivity of half of their case. The second thing that they tell you is that social care is important. One, we would argue that not all people want this sort of care, so you shouldn't paint every single disabled person in this brush. But secondly, we would tell you that it's not true. At least on our side of the house, these people have a choice to invest in that same sort of care. This is based on the premise that those schools are still going to exist, that this service is still going to exist anyway. The only difference is that the government doesn't finance that directly. But finally, we think what they needed to do in order to win was prove that that degree of utility exists on their side. Not every disabled person is the same. Let's weigh up then on their minorities chat as to whether minorities do need more grants than the people of the disabled. One, we told you that we can't quantify people's suffering. That was quite literally the only thing that Eli and I actually pushed in the debate. Secondly, we told you that it is not broad enough to compensate for the millions of people who have been represented. Thirdly, we told you that the comparative is that they have more purchasing power on our side of the house to use existing medication that has not been afforded to them. Secondly, how do we cater for the individuals? One, we don't make disabled people compete for which disability of theirs is more important. This is what closing opposition says. We don't stand for it. Secondly, we told you that on our side of the house, not only do disabled people get more direct representation, but they have empowerment through their choices. On our side, stipends do this. On our side of the house panel, we recognize that not all disabled people are static, that they're different and they need to be appreciated. You can only do this when you serve them directly. You can only do this through stipends. For these reasons, you must stand with closing government.
Thank you very much, Government Whip, for that speech. We now invite the opposition whip to close the debate for us.
Hope you guys can hear me. I'll take OG and CG, both on the third and fifth minutes, respectively. I think I'll start with CG, then OG. So third minute, CG shoot. Fifth minute, OG at liberty to shoot. Please notify me if at any point I break so that I'm aware, just in case. Just give me a sec. Set my timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. And I think then there's a problem in this entirety of the debate because government sides
have a bit of logical inconsistency. You cannot come and tell us that the government does not value these individuals, that they will not cater to their needs, and still tell us that you still cater to their needs by giving them money. If you do not value something, you don't put more investment in it. That's why we're saying on our side, the government will get more complacent. And here's the biggest intuition panel to show you how this happens. When governments give out medical insurance, especially to their workers, they tend not to give consideration to the public sectors and public hospitals. Why is that the case? Because now their medical insurance affords them private institutions and private hospitals. You see, it's the same thing that will happen. In the event that the government now gives you money, it then means that it forfeits its right to actually pay for anything else. And I think that's the problem. We asked this question that how much money is enough because there are growing needs that can come over time. But before then, let me actually weigh this debate before we get into the gist of it and tell you why we win over each side panel and why we take the day. I think the first thing is the benefits that we accrue to the disabled people directly and indirectly. And I think the most important thing is we show that we actually preserve the human dignity of these individuals. Notice that CG tells you that these people don't want to work, but I think it's a lie because if they don't want to work, then why then are they fighting for the representation? I think panel for them to achieve this representation, they need to work. I think then that's a big problem because that's untrue. If they really need the representation, they would ideally work towards the representation, meaning that not all of them see themselves as a vegetative state or people that need to be dependent on. I think then, panel, the perspective of disability is broad and wide. And here's why we think that these people actually need their dignity preserved. One, it furthers the actualization, and this is the benefit that we get from side closing opposition, and this is what the member had actually said earlier. Notice that, but the mere fact that these people are taught how to cope in a world where everyone else is able, they're able to have some semblance of skills which allows them to specifically traverse the earth with what they require them to do. This means that if they need to communicate, they can communicate through things like sign language, which is something that now is available to them. Notice that these are skills that are given to the government for free. I don't think that CG actually is fair by telling us that the government does not understand the needs of these individuals, because I think the needs are known. If you're deaf, you want to learn how to communicate. If you're blind, you want to learn how to move. And I think, panel, we agree with OO in terms of mobility, but however, we want to guarantee the social mobility compared to just the physical mobility. Here's why the actualization is important. These guys actually have an opportunity to get jobs because of the mere fact that affirmative action is important. Notice that if you give these people stipends, it means that you can't give them jobs at the same time, because now people will be like, if they're already being paid by the government, why else should I hire them? That means that you reverse the affirmative action procedures that have been done, the policies that are set in place to ensure that these people have some semblance of actualization and some semblance of money. I think then it becomes a problem, because that means you drop them back to the dependency cycle that you're trying to alleviate them from through this stipend itself. And I think that, panel, I think a case where donations and charity is what people are reliant on, then further the dependency cycle in itself, because as more disabled people are being born, they don't know how to maneuver and cope with the world. And as you pay for more people and the stipends continue becoming a burden, especially for developing states, it then means that you have to incur a cost. Panel, notice that this would mean that at one point the budget of the government would expand, and that then means, just in a second, they will not be able to cater to the needs and the growing concerns of these disabled people. That then means that by borrowing money, they incur more debt. So the government now has more debt, which means that they devalue these individuals according to what CG has told us, which then means that they now have a problem, because now you devalue the individuals and now you still take care of them, which I think is a bit oxymoronic. You can't tell me you don't value them, you don't see them as a beneficial to the economy. We show you how we solve the benefits to the economy, and we show you how they could be important, because not every disabled person is limited. We concede, yes, there are those that are in a vegetative state, those who need complete and utter support, those who need palliative care and day-to-day care. However, there are those who can actually function. So people who are blind can still learn how to write and do such things. People who are talented as well are still able to maximize on this talent despite their disabilities. And I think that's a problem that we get, because the spectrum of disability has been narrowed down to physical incapacity instead of mental capacity. And even at a point where mental capacity becomes a challenge, we still offer this psychological support. And I think, shoot, PUI, CG.
The needs are known to the government. The needs are clearly not known because these individuals are nuanced in their perspectives and opinions on how they should be treated.
Okay, I think you're the ones who claim that they don't know the needs of these individuals, but I think that's a lie, panel, because we showed you that these people have specific needs according to what they need. I think then, panel, that's why we believe that it's completely illogical and untrue. We don't see why that's a problem, because I think other than the mere fact that primary needs are a concern, there are other needs that are more important, and I think that's a problem that we actually get with each side. So why do we win over any side in this debate? I think OG, just give me a second. I think OG makes a very big mistake because they run their case on the idea of autonomy. We believe autonomy is maximized where these individuals have their own resources, they've actualized their potential, they now have resources, they're able to choose what they want, panel. And these resources are not just the result of donations, the result of hard work. That then means that they're able to maximize, alleviate themselves from the poverty, panel. Because notice that no one takes to consideration that these people can sometimes be born poor and they need to get out of this poverty just because they're disabled. Does not mean that they should live in poverty, panel. I think that's a bit unfair for everyone to argue. Secondly, we enhance this quality of life. And I think the idea of OG telling us that this quality of life is enhanced through giving money becomes a problem because bureaucracy in itself is going to kill these individuals. Because when do they receive this money? How do they get the money? And I think the problem is no one gives us a characterization of what these disabled needs would cater, the money caters for which needs, because everyone tells you that they have money to fend, but they don't have money to cope. And I think that's a problem. Even if panel, the bare minimum is even if panel, there is a bare minimum of needs that is known, I think the vast majority of instances we beat them on scope because at the very least we at least give them the opportunity to actualize their potential, which is far much better than anything else you get in this debate. I think then panel, they talk about government not abandoning these services, but then want to give the burden of these services to NGOs. Then I think then panel, there is no idea why exactly would the government then I think that's a bit counterproductive. The government is not abandoning the service, but you're pushing it to NGOs. I think then it's a problem because that then it becomes counterproductive. Because if you didn't want to abandon the service, you shouldn't have started the stipend. You wouldn't need to push this thing to NGOs. And then notice that you create the dependency cycle because now these people have to deal with a third party actor who does not understand the needs of the state and the context of these individuals in their day-to-day life, which then means you waste a lot of resources learning these individuals. And I think that's a problem. Our distinction from OO is that I'm in protected time, unfortunately. The distinction from OO is that one, we don't believe in the idea of stimulus checks, and I think that's one thing they brought about because stimulus checks are used for individuals, and these things are there, but stimulus checks should be used at a point of poverty. But even if the stimulus checks do not solve the poverty itself, we're the only side that achieves some semblance of solvency for these individuals from their day-to-day needs. I think even we beat them on scope because we recognize that there are better needs other than just the physical needs, and we apologize on behalf of the closing half of the debate because CG invalidates what the leader of opposition's feelings are, and I think that's a mistake. I think the other thing is we recognize the limitation of budget because at the end of the day, other than us recognizing it, we realize the need to solve the problem that is there by getting these people away to actualize themselves. That's not getting into a dependency cycle. Panel, no side advocates for dignity better than CEO. No side advocates for change better than CEO. No side achieves solvency better than CEO. If you side with any other side other than CEO, you are slowing down the needs for the people with disabilities. With that, I rest.
Thank you very much, Opposition, for that speech and for bringing us to the end of the debate. So you will be hearing the results in the auditorium when we'll tell you all on the group when to come back for results. So please, judges, join me in the deliberation room.